just had such an impact in my life, and I'm very excited to share my testimony tonight. Growing up, I grew up in a Christian family, going to church, going to Sunday school, and personally, I thought I was a pretty good guy. I got good grades, wasn't in trouble at home, wasn't in trouble at school, and just overall thought I was doing pretty good. But at that time, I didn't really see how lost I really was. And I've always been a very competitive person, and I think that was evident at a young age. My sister would always say, "Michael, come here," and she'd be laying on the couch, so I'd go over there and just say, "I bet you can't go get me water in 10 seconds. Tear her across the kitchen, get her across the water, tear her back. Oh, you just barely made it." As I wisened up in a couple years, I realized she was never timing me. But that competitive attitude and just carried over to my sports, but the same way, I wasn't playing for the right reasons. I was playing for me. I wanted to be the guy in the spotlight. I wanted it to be about Michael Hadden. And once again, I didn't see how lost I was. And that was until I came to an FCA banquet in 6th grade and listened to John and Guy Earl speak. These guys talked about how they played their sport for Christ, and they lived their life for Christ. And that's something that really struck me. I was out there playing for myself. I wasn't playing for Jesus. So that night, they talked about devoting their life to Christ. And they finished their speech with a prayer. And they wanted everyone to put their heads down. And they talked about you could raise your hand if you hadn't been saved by Christ. So that night, I raised my hand and accepted Jesus as my Savior. But, I kind of went back on living my life. Nothing really changed much. It was until that summer when I went to FCA camp up at Spearfish. And I heard some great speakers. They talked about in Romans how sinners are arrogant and greedy, envious, full of malice and deceit. And I realized I do all of those things. It was at that point I realized how sinful I really was and how much I needed Jesus in my life. From that point on, I wanted to live my life for Christ. I'm just so thankful for the grace of God that, He sent His one and only perfect Son for me, the person that falls short time and time again. And He sent that Son for me. Now that I've made that decision to live my life for Christ, some people tell me, being a Christian, it's got to be boring. You can't have any fun. But I see it the exact opposite. I have a choice now. Before, all I knew was sin. But now I can turn away from that sin, and I do have a choice. And I find great freedom in being a Christian. The verse Jeremiah 29:11 really sticks with me. "For I know the plans for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to do you harm. Plans to give you hope in a future." And this verse just speaks to me, especially in sports, because I know that God does have a plan for me. And I don't need to worry about the end result. But if I can just go out and control my effort and attitude, I'm going to give 100 miles per hour whenever I can and control my attitude, that God already knows the end result. And He has that under control. Another verse that goes along with that is Proverbs 3:5 and 6. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." And as a Christian, not everything's going to go your way. And yet, I know that God's working behind, even in my troubling times. He's working behind it and drawing me closer to Him. And I just take His grace is just so great to do that for me. As a Christian athlete, I began to realize that winning wasn't everything, like I used to think. And I'd like to share a story about my 2 trips to the state tournament. My junior season, in the semifinal game, I had 2 free throws as the clock was running down and we were behind by 1 point. After the game, many people asked me, "Were you nervous? What was going on through your mind?" And I told them, as I thought back on it, I just had a sense of peace in knowing that the result was already decided and God knew what would happen. I was just going to go out and give my best. I know I glorified Him through my play, and so I wasn't really nervous. We went on to win the state championship that year. Now this year, we came 1 game short and lost the state championship. Many people might see this as failure, but in my heart, although I was disappointed, I knew that once again I'd given it my all for God, and I still had that same peace that I did on the free throw line the year before. In closing, I'd like to share one more verse, and that's Galatians 2:20. "And I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me." Now that I live for Christ, it isn't about me anymore. It isn't about Michael Hadden or being in the spotlight. But I hope that through me, people can see the character of Christ. And I'm just so grateful that God has given me something to live for. Thank you, and God bless.